Great. So we have here our wonderful guest, Rob Buscher. He's in the greater Philly area, and he's a president of the Philadelphia chapter of the JACL, which is the Japan American Citizens League, or Japanese American Citizens League. And he's also a board chair of the Philadelphia Asian American Film Festival, and also a media specialist and an educator, and he lectures at University of Pennsylvania, right in Philly. So he's quite articulate in a lot of things, and this is a wonderful chance for our Lehigh Valley JAJAJA community to get to know some of our local experts, and on a more personal level, really. And this Pecha series is a new series that we started, and the format is we have a slide presentation where each slide is about 20 seconds, and up to 20 slides. The whole presentation is pretty much under 10 minutes. And we'll have a short, time for Q&A, and I'll have a couple questions, and ideally we have, a couple guests here that are tuning in live. So if you have any questions, feel free to type it in the chat box. But yeah, I think this is a really great opportunity for all of our community members to start to get to know each other, feel connected during these really troubling times of being apart and not being able to have a potluck and, cook delicious food together and just get to know each other better. So this is a great opportunity for us to invite Rob Buscher into the Lehigh Valley JAJAJA community for this evening. So with that said, I will share my screen to the presenter view. And if everybody can mute yourselves, that would be ideal. So let me do that. PowerPoint here. And okay, I will mute myself. Rob?
All right. Thank you so much, Miki, for inviting me, and I'm glad to join this group. I'm going to be presenting a little bit about the Japanese American Citizens League in general, as well as the activities that our Philadelphia chapter is engaged in, as well as talking a little bit about my background as a mixed-race Japanese American. So we can go ahead and get started with the presentation. So the JACL, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is a lot of things. These are photographs from some of the activities that we've engaged in over the past 18 months or so. We are first and foremost a social justice and civil rights organization, but we are also a social organization that is about building community among the Japanese American community, as well as preserving the heritage and educating people about the history of Japanese Americans. So it's many things to many people. And some of those people are the Nisei and even some Issei who came here to Philadelphia. Prior to World War II, there was an extremely small number of Japanese in Pennsylvania, largely clustered around Philadelphia, folks who were mainly in the universities, University of Pennsylvania specifically. But also after World War II, a lot of folks were welcomed to settle here by the Quakers. And so we see some photos here of Japanese Americans that were incarcerated during World War II and had the opportunity to relocate here and resettle in Philadelphia. These are some photos of me with my many Japanese American relatives. As I had mentioned earlier, I'm a mixed race Japanese American, a yonsei. So I'm pictured here with my Oba-chan, my great grandma, in the top left-hand corner. She lived until the ripe age of 96 years old. I was in college by the time she passed away. So I had an incredible insight that most yonsei do not get into the actual culture of Japan, including an opportunity to connect with our Japanese relatives who live in Hiroshima, who are in the bottom right-hand corner. But because of this, my family and our heritage has been intertwined, not just with the Japanese American community, but with Japan and Japanese culture. Prior to settling here in Philadelphia, I was born and raised in Connecticut, rural suburban area, where the only other Japanese Americans were my mom and sister. I spent 6 years traveling the world. When I was in college and grad school, I lived abroad in the United Kingdom as well as in Japan. And I had the opportunity to travel to a great number of places, expanding my horizons, and in a way, I think coming to terms with the identity that I have as a mixed race person, as well as embracing the Japanese roots that I have. So these days, you know, my main profession is kind of a mixture between social justice advocacy work around immigration issues, as well as educating Asian American studies. I teach at the University of Pennsylvania in our Asian American Studies program, the only program of its kind in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. For the past 7 years, I have also served as the festival director of the Philadelphia Asian American Film Festival. And I do quite a bit of work in diversity, inclusion, and equity, consulting with corporate clients, as well as giving lectures to schools and other groups. So back to the JACL. This photo is one that I took with the late, great John Lewis, pictured here in the center. Representative Lewis was obviously an important figure within the Black liberation movement, particularly in the civil rights era. But also, you know, having an opportunity to hear him speak when I was a younger person, first having joined the Philadelphia JACL, it helped to contextualize the kind of work that we were doing and why it's important for Japanese Americans to have a voice in civil rights. And that kind of carries through to a lot of the work that we do today. So these photographs are from a couple of different rallies that were hosted at the Berks Family Detention Center. It's one of 3 ICE-operated facilities in the United States where child migrants are detained. And it's actually just outside of Reading, Pennsylvania, about an hour and 30 minutes from Philadelphia. This is a group of members from the JACL chapter, as well as some other advocates, joining together just outside of the Berks Detention Center for a rally supporting the families and trying to show this parallel that we feel between the Japanese American incarceration in World War II and what is currently happening. Another one of the major issue advocacy areas for the JACL Philadelphia chapter is combating Islamophobia, because in the same way that Japanese and Japanese Americans were targeted in the months and years after Pearl Harbor, the Muslim American community has faced great racism and suffering because of 9/11, mainly being scapegoated for things that, you know, they certainly had no more a role in than any of the Japanese Americans did in Pearl Harbor. So we actually hosted an exhibit called American Peril, where we displayed actual artifacts of propaganda spanning from 150 years, including World War II anti-Japanese, as well as some of the post-9/11 propaganda. As well as some portrait photographs of community members, kind of showing the real impact that these propaganda items have on them and their families. So these are just a few images of that. And you can see here, this is actually the photo shoot of one of the couples that was featured. Rieko Watanabe is a Japanese Shin Issei immigrant. Her husband, Ali Kubei, Iranian American, second generation, and their daughter, Chloe Haru. And she's shown here with, unfortunately, these 2 very disturbing images of racial caricatures, essentializing both of her parents' races or ethnicities. And yeah, this is just one of the projects that the JACL Philadelphia has undertaken in the last couple of years. Aside from the advocacy work, though, we are a community organization, right? And for a lot of Japanese Americans, not just in our region, but really throughout the country, JACL is the only major Japanese American organization that since the post-war era was kind of there to help bring people together and allow them a safe space to continue celebrating Japanese and Japanese American culture. So these are a couple of our more social events. On the left-hand side is our Oshogatsu party that we host each year. This is at the Medford Lee's retirement community. You can see in the bottom left-hand corner, one of our younger members is helping to serve ozoni, which is cooked by several of the Nisei women who live in that retirement facility. On the right-hand side is a few photos from our most recent visit to George Nakashima Woodworking Studio. George's daughter, Mira Nakashima, is pictured in the center, showing us around the wood shed, and you can see a finished table in the top right-hand corner. One of the most prominent events throughout the year that kind of combines the social aspect with the advocacy component is the Day of Remembrance. Day of Remembrance is acknowledged on February 19th nationwide, the anniversary of Executive Order 9066 that led to the mass incarceration of Japanese Americans in World War II. The last few years we've been hosting it at Philadelphia City Hall. This year it took place just a couple of weeks before the COVID lockdown began, but we were lucky to be joined by Karen Korematsu, the daughter of Fred Korematsu, one of the three Nisei who took the United States government to court during World War II to contest the legality of their incarceration. You can also see that we have food and obviously some socializing that takes place at these events. My favorite event that JACL hosts annually is the National Convention. So JACL is a membership organization. We have over 100 chapters nationwide. And every year we gather in a different host city where one of the local chapters brings us together. And these are a collection of photographs from both the Salt Lake City Convention and the Philadelphia Convention that took place in 2019 and 2018 respectively. There's a lot of business that happens at this. It's an opportunity for the delegates from each chapter to come together and vote on various policy issues that the JACL will then go and advocate on behalf of at the national level. But it's also a time of socialization, and it's a time for people to celebrate their culture in a variety of ways. The bottom right-hand corner is a photograph from a Japanese American hip hop show that we hosted at the Barnes Foundation in Philadelphia back in 2018. The center image was an open mic night that we hosted. And you can see many of the younger Yonsei and Shin Nisei in the top right-hand corner enjoying a meal together at the hotel in Salt Lake. Top left-hand corner shows the Topaz incarceration camp where we actually visited after our business sessions concluded last summer. One of the other excellent opportunities, especially for young people, that we have is called the JACL OCA Joint Leadership Summit. It takes place in Washington, D.C. every spring, and it brings together leaders from both the JACL and the Organization of Chinese Americans, which is our sister organization in the Chinese American community, to basically provide some training in terms of lobbying to actually set up meetings with some of our congressional representatives and talk about a variety of issues that are important to both organizations. It's also a great opportunity cross-culturally and cross-organizationally to build partnerships. This is an image from some of the National Youth and Student Council events. So we have a couple of different affinity groups within the JACL membership, and NYSC is the oldest and, in my opinion, the most important. It's meant for young people as young as 12 years old and goes up till 25 years of age, basically providing leadership training as well as a number of funded opportunities to gather with individuals from their peer group in the exploration of their Japanese American identity, as well as training in a variety of issue areas for people who are interested in the advocacy component of JACL. More importantly, I think it gives young people a real place of power within our organization to kind of leverage the history and the many connections that the JACL has as they explore their early careers and even their school years in finding fellowships and internships. This is another affinity group called the Young Professionals Caucus, or YPC for short. So basically picking up where the NYSC leaves off when people age out at age 26 up until age 35. This group is actually one that I helped to co-found along with a couple of other young leaders in the organization, basically acknowledging that there was kind of a gap in the pipeline of leadership. So a lot of the young people historically had been very active until they aged out of the youth category, and then seeing nothing for them in the organization, they would go elsewhere and do work with other organizations. This was our solution to kind of maintain that connection as young people are kind of getting into early to mid-career, helping with some mentorship and, again, career development tools, and certainly a lot of social opportunities. One of our most exciting projects is Kakehashi, which is a larger project of the foreign affairs in Japan. We work closely with the embassy to maintain a special stream of funding that allows us to send 100 Japanese American youth under the age of 25 to Japan every year. Obviously, COVID has made things a little more difficult, but we certainly hope to resume this program once it is safe to do so. These are some photos from the February 2019 trip that I had the pleasure of chaperoning. Our group visited Minami Aizu, just north of Tokyo, and we had an opportunity to do homestays with local families for 2 or 3 nights, as well as exploring some of the sites that you can see here. The Pacific Citizen is the national newspaper of the JACL. So our paper has been around actually since the year that we were founded in 1929, making it one of the oldest continuously operated Japanese American newspapers in the country, and really the only national Japanese American newspaper. While there are other Japanese American newspapers like Rafu Shimpo and the Nichibei Weekly, these are located in cities in the West Coast. Pacific Citizen reports on issues for all people across the country. Pictured to the right is the editorial board, which I have the pleasure of chairing, making me also a national board member of the JACL. On the left-hand side, this is a photograph from a film showing a Japanese American soldier in World War II reading a copy of PC while he was fighting in the European front of the war. The really exciting area that I've had the pleasure of working on also with JACL National is to secure funding for special exhibits and other projects that we are interested in using to tell the stories of Japanese Americans. This is called the Legacy Fund, and every year the JACL awards about $30,000 of Legacy Fund money. Largely, it's a fund that came from the redress. So when Japanese Americans received that formal apology and monetary recompense from the government after the Civil Liberties Act of 1988 was passed, a great deal of those individuals donated their money back to the JACL with the hope that they could continue in perpetuity to teach future generations about their endeavors. The photos that you're looking at here are actually 2 images from an exhibit that I'm working on right now, which is looking at the resettlement of Japanese Americans into Greater Philadelphia region during and after World War II through artifacts and art objects that were created during and after camp. And so this is an exhibit that we're working on and are hoping to launch a virtual preview of by June 2021. One of the other things that I've had the privilege of engaging with over the last couple of years is the pilgrimage movement. So I know that there are a number of JAJAJA members who are immigrants who came after World War II, but for those of us who can trace our lineage to pre-war, almost all of us have some connection to the incarceration camps. And the pilgrimage movement is something that started in the late 1960s as Asian Americans were kind of beginning to join in the civil rights movement as a way to kind of reclaim and process one of the most difficult chapters of our history as Japanese Americans. So I've had the privilege of going on a couple of different pilgrimages to Topaz in Utah, as well as the Heart Mountain pilgrimage in Wyoming. I'm actually currently working on a podcast with the Heart Mountain Wyoming Foundation. So we can certainly talk more about that afterwards in the Q&A. The last thing that I wanted to kind of end with here, and I think this will segue nicely into our discussion, JACL is so many things, as you've seen from this short presentation. And it's important to acknowledge that Japanese Americans are so many things too, right? Because at this point, we have the highest intermarriage rate out of any other Asian ethnicity. All of the people on the left-hand side are people of Japanese ancestry. All of the people on the right-hand side are as well, and in fact, are current elected board members of the National JACL board. All 7 of our elected board members are either Shin Nisei or Hapa, mixed race Japanese Americans. So I think this traditional narrative of who Japanese Americans are has shifted so much, and it requires us to really understand you know, what are the things that we have in common between the folks who immigrated pre-war, the folks who immigrated post-war, people who are coming today, and certainly individuals that are multi-ethnic or multiracial. JACL has been instrumental in helping me to understand that identity, and certainly I think can be a great resource to others who either are multiracial or have these other identities that we're talking about. So yeah, that concludes the formal presentation. Obviously, this format doesn't allow me to go into too much detail with any of these topics, but I'm hoping that these short tidbits of information are things that can kind of spark our conversation from here. I'm happy to take questions from the audience, and I know that Miki also has some questions prepared.